So I gotta say, the prologue of Deadhouse Gates better than all of Gardens of the Moon put together. What? What?
No, I was expecting someone to say a joke, and no one did. So I started laughing.
Okay. Do you,
Don't you usually laugh when people say jokes?
what's this? This is so scuffed. All right, we're gonna start one last time. Duck, you say
Okay,
something.
yeah,
Duck, you say
I'm
something
gonna,
after what I
I'm
say.
gonna
We
mute
need to, like-
myself until the beginning is over.
Okay.
Okay.
We need
Everyone
to,
shut up.
plan out the whole intro. Okay.
Hello, and welcome to the Malazan read-through podcast hosted by Werb. My name is Duck, and we have finally gotten back into the series, and we are on Deadhouse Gates.
And I gotta say, the prologue of Deadhouse Gates is honestly better than the entirety of Gardens of the Moon put together. The rest of Deadhouse Gates we're building up, but that prologue was a banger.
You called me crazy when I said that Gardens of the Moon wasn't that good, by the way.
Well, so
I
far,
know.
Deadhouse Gates is not, blowing it out of the water. It's just shown that it might with that prologue.
It will. I'm
It
100%
will.
sure.
It will. Yeah. Like, Deadhouse Gates has a really good ending. Like, all of the issues with Gardens of the Moon ending, Deadhouse Gates, fixes it.
What issues?
You have to introduce yourself, by the way.
Yeah,
Hi,
done
I'm Lynn. The last time I was on this podcast, I had read book 1 of House of Chains, and now I have read book 1 of House of Chains plus 2 more chapters. Actually, 1 more chapter.
that is the fastest you have ever read the series.
It's true.
We
And
love to see it.
I'm still Werb. I'm done with book 1 of Deadhouse Gates.
Hello, I'm Eve. I have read through book 5, Midnight Tides, and then also Night of Knives, and then I sort of flopped, but I'm gonna be getting back to Bone Hunters soon.
Yeah, I'm catching up with you very
I know.
slowly. Like I am a tortoise, and you are you're like a tortoise that's missing a leg.
Thanks. Love that.
I'm a tortoise that's missing 2 legs.
I think you're a tortoise that's on its back, Lynn.
No, you're a tortoise that got a
I'm just a
lobotomy.
tortoise shell.
All right, so we do have some structure for what we want to talk about. Werb, introduce us to our first topic.
Yeah, so this was not how the book started, but once I got there, I was like, we have to address this first. We have to talk about the reveal that Amanas and Cotillion are, you're not going to believe this, actually Krupp and Iskarl Pust.
It was them the entire time.
Which I know that Lynn is a big simp for Cotillion, and I know this has only increased her attraction.
Exactly.
I mean, I'll be honest, Iskro Pust, he's old, but he's one of the more entertaining crazy characters.
I
I see value in Iskro Pust that I do not see in Krupp.
Okay, jokes aside, Cotillion is dancer and Amanas is Kellanved.
Helen Ved.
Anyway, pretty crazy stuff. So that was a pretty low-key reveal, and I think Duck told me that it is that way because it was supposed to be obvious in book 1.
In massive
No.
air quotes, by the
No,
way.
so
We're all just
I knew it
idiots.
in book 1 because
Because I
was
told you.
have a
simping
weird
over because I
disrespectful
was
obsession
simping
with
over
Cotillion.
Cotillion, and
Yeah.
then Duck was like, "Read the first poem," and I was like, "Oh, Shadow."
It
You
all
are
makes
the
sense.
only person on Earth who figured that out, and it was just because of your Cotillion thirst.
Now,
So,
I can
respect it.
totally imagine that if like only book 1 is out, but you love it and you're like rereading it, waiting for book 2, I could see you
Mhm.
coming to it.
I think on a reread
Yeah.
it becomes pretty obvious because at least for me a barrier was I wasn't sure how ascendancy and godhood worked in when I
Mhm.
first started reading, and so the idea that even I remember when I first read Gardens of the Moon and Opon showed up, I was like, oh, this is a series where the gods are real. I thought this was a metaphor or whatever. And so when you go back and you read it sort of with that option in mind, like the way that people talk around it makes a lot of sense, and you kind of put it together. But the first read through, you're not even like clocking that that's an option. Like, okay, well they died because what else can they do?
Yeah. And I think the thing that's really interesting about this is it kind of takes one story and replaces it retroactively with a more interesting one because Amanus and Cotillion were just like their own plot line, where it's like it's a mystery why they want to take this all down. And the main way I really take the premise of the series is like, oh, the emperor died, and we're sort of seeing what happens when someone else takes power after killing the emperor, and we're sort of wondering how they'll do. And that's a perfectly interesting narrative. It just so happens that the actual narrative that the emperor and his right-hand man, survived and became shadow gods and are secretly trying to get their revenge, that's just more interesting.
It also, I think, makes you relook at a lot of the characters in Gardens of the Moon a little bit differently. Like Lysine's paranoia, for example, that the old guard is coming to get her, is a lot more justified when you realize that like the old emperor and the old assassin are not only alive, but they are gods and they are pissed.
Yeah, like Whiskey Jack literally has Dancer working for him, and he doesn't know it. But from Lysine's perspective, she has to worry about whether, Cotillion has just decided to talk to Whiskey Jack and actually start working together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
one thing I love about Malazan is how the gods are like reachable figures, like not really approachable necessarily, but like they are people that you can interact with, and like they will interact with you whether you like it or not sometimes. And
Yeah.
I think that there's like so many really interesting takes on like godhood, some of which you've seen, some of which you haven't, but like this is just another layer to that where it's like, okay, they were real people like not that long ago. And I think that like the mystery surrounding that entire circumstance, like we still don't really know how it happened or why it happened. I think that adds to it a lot.
Yeah. And it sort of puts like the series going forward in a different light because Cotillion and Amanus were a big plot line, but they were just one plot line for a while. Like they could have been a plot line that like ends in book 3 or something, and other things continue forward. But now it's like I don't know if it'll last all the way to book 10, but it feels like no, this is like the core. This is one of the cores of the narrative we are telling here, because this is like core to the story of the Malazan Empire. Not to say that a few great people are the core to history. I think we all know that that's silly and that Erickson knows it's silly. But when those people are gods and when they're trying some big things, they're at least going to be pretty significant.
I also think that it puts Absolar in a more interesting position because she does like she. I don't know if it was revealed in the last book, but in this book, it's like she has some access to the memories and skills of Cotillion, and those memories are a lot more interesting where they are of the former like second most powerful person in the most powerful empire in the world, and like even the way that that's revealed with her like remembering a conversation that she had with the then Surly, um, and how that went. Like it gives you like a really interesting perspective into that part of the world where you don't really have we don't like get Lysine's point of view, at least so far. So like getting the opportunity to get a little bit more about how the politics worked and how the empire functioned when it was actually like up and going, I think adds a little bit more to that plot line too.
Yeah.
Like, I think it also makes, I think, Cotillion and Shadow Throne more interesting because, like, initially when you just see them, they're just like two like scheming dudes committing war crimes. But like, and we don't actually have a lot of idea of like their personalities. But now they have like all this, like we get like bits and pieces through like how their soldiers saw them. And like now we have all these people who like had interacted with them in the past in a completely different way, who now have to like interact with them again in this like different way in the
Yeah, like we
future.
haven't even seen them more in this book, but there is just like implicit characterization because now we know Amanus is doing all of this for revenge. And like that
Yeah.
just inherently adds more, even though like there isn't more text on it
I don't know if we
necessarily.
mentioned this on a
Mhm.
previous podcast, but cotillion is a type of
Oh
Yeah,
dance.
yeah.
that's another joke.
Well,
Like a cotillion is a
yeah.
ballroom dance.
Oh no, I
That's
got that
like
once it
the
pointed
joke.
it out during the scene where they figure it out. I was like, oh yeah, like because I There's that joke from Gravity Falls that is like what I think of whenever I hear the word cotillion, and I just sort of discounted that from the start. I was like, oh well, it's just a word that Erickson chose to use here, and like, no, it actually is that. The part that confuses me though is the timeline, because
Oh God.
there's two characters, and there's also like just the general like how does any of this work, and those two characters are Quick Ben and Iskarl Pust, because like Quick Ben.
New ship just dropped. Check AO3 tomorrow, guys. I'll provide.
I feel like you know, not a lot of people could handle Iskarl Pust, but Quick Ben is, up to a
Quick
challenge.
Ben could. He's badass, yeah.
Yeah.
He can handle anything.
I mean, there was that point where
And a
he
bunch of
unleashed
spiders.
all his Warrens at once, remember?
Yes.
Like, someone who can do that, take on Iskarl Pust in the bedroom. Anyway, so Quick Ben was a member of, like, the, church is the wrong word, but, like, the Church of Shadow, and he left. And, like, Amanas, was familiar with that and was like, you bastard, you left. And Iskarl Pust, I don't know his history, but he doesn't give the vibes that he just started doing this job, this week. It feels like he's been like this for a while.
I might be wrong, but I think Shadow, like the Warren of Shadow, exists independently of Shadow Throne, like
Well,
chilling there.
that's one of my questions though, because
So they
we
were like, I think Quick Ben was literally beefing with like an empty throne for a while. Like well, like Ted Cruz, was it Ted Cruz or was it like whoever like talked to the chair?
Ted
Clint
Cruz,
Eastwood?
wait, what?
you're
Ted
thinking
Cruz,
of
the leader of
thinking
Shadow.
Oh my
you're
God.
thinking of
Tell me
Clint
you're not
Eastwood.
American without
Yeah. Clint Eastwood talking to like
I
beefing
mean,
with a
Ted
chair.
Cruz.
I guess that's a valid and
comment.
funny comparison. It's just definitely not Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was the one who was reading Dr. Seuss in Congress. Anyway,
Tell him to read Malazan next.
I think it mentioned in Gardens of the Moon that the Warren of Shadow only opened around the time Lacine took control, and like, well, obviously that makes sense why now, but it's also like, I mean, I'm sure it was there, but, and I guess it just wasn't open, but then like, if Quick Ben was like beefing with an empty throne, then how was there a temple of people like using the Shadow Warren if the Warren wasn't open?
Yeah.
And like, does Quick Ben know that this is the former emperor? And it's like, even if he was beefing with an empty throne, why does Zamanis give a shit? Because I think Quick Ben, in that whole scene in Guardians of the Moon, it was implied that Quick Ben was like a shapeshifter, probably like another one of them soul
He
taken.
says you shape-shifting bastard, right?
Yeah. And so like, Amanis seemed like he was pissed to see it was Quick Ben, which means like, I mean, if Kellenved only just became a part of this, and Quick Ben was already him, he was already in the Bridge Burners before Kellenved was deposed by Lacine. And so basically, why does Amanis give a shit? Why is he that mad at Quick Ben being there? And like, maybe there's just something to do with their personal history in addition to the Warren of Shadow business. Maybe that was just something we couldn't distinguish back in that Gardens of the Moon chapter. But either way, it's confusing. And it's also just like, I don't know, with Iskarl Pust, I guess it can just be he's always worked for the Warren of Shadow even before Amanis, stepped into the job. But I don't know. At the very least, I'm gonna want some clarification at some point within the next 8 books.
I know there are some things later that I won't go into details about with like the throne being empty, but there are still followers of that like entity or that Warren.
Yeah.
But
guess.
I don't really understand how that works. So I can't be any help here. Like because it makes sense to me that there would still be like cults of shadow, right? Like people still like following that ideology. But could you access the Warren, like the magic?
Yeah.
If it was closed?
So I'm going to say 2 things as someone who has read this entire series.
And knows the most about it by far.
And yes, the foremost expert.
The resident Malazan expert, yeah.
Yeah, so one thing is that I think that scene with Quick Ben and Amanis is one of those that like when I talk about jank in Gardens of the Moon, that's one of the scenes that I feel like was like would be written a little bit differently if Erickson went back. That's more speculation, but given it's maybe not 100% productive to like mine that
Right.
scene as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, so I like it's probably not going to contradict anything, but maybe like its
That is a
implications.
scene that is still talked about as like kind of it's still weird.
Like I shouldn't extrapolate from that scene.
No, you should not. But what Eve said is correct in the sense that the Warren exists longer than like Shadow Throne and Cotillion, and they are not the first people to take the throne. I don't know if that's been established, but
I'm actually like, I was actually wondering about this because, like, is it like when you, because like we see like when Cotillion possesses Sorry, he leaves like a mark on
Yeah.
her. Like when Amonis ascends to be Shadow Throne, does he also take on some of the characteristics of like the previous Shadow people? Like, is that like I could just be shot
no,
in the
I
dark
think that's a
here.
question that the series is trying to explore. Like I don't know if there's like
Okay.
a mechanics answer to that, but yeah, the question of like how different.
Mechanics in Malazan? Don't you
Yeah, I know,
just
right?
open a warren and do
Yeah,
magic?
you
You
just
just
use the
open
Warren
it.
of Chaos and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, easy.
But yeah, like like how different Kellenved is from Shadow Throne and how different Cotillion is from Dancer is an interesting question. That the series is going to give you material to think about as it goes forward. And later when we get more into like what ascendancy is and how it works, these questions also become a little bit more well defined. But yeah, I think with the information that you have right now, you're not going to be able to draw any conclusions.
Yeah, and I'm not really trying to like perfectly understand ascendancy at the moment. I'm more just trying to make sure that like I understand where kind of Quickben or Iskerl Pust's positions relative to this Warren and its leader, where those things land, just because like I feel like, future scenes, future dynamics, future decisions will probably depend upon like understanding like how loyal Iskerl Pust is and like
Yeah,
and the kind of understanding like I guess it makes sense that he is just someone who was loyal to the Warren and is still loyal to the Warren now that it has a leader. That's probably it, but I just like at least want to make sure I got that because that
yeah.
context is like probably relevant because he's going to do things.
And the thing that should be obvious from the last book, but it's good to like put a reminder here, is that what it means to be loyal is not exactly well defined. And so,
Of course.
yeah, like Iskril Puss might say, "I'm loyal to the Warren of Shadow or whatever." That does not necessarily mean that he is going to do what Shadow Throne says, or maybe
Yeah,
it
I'm
does,
not
depending on the individual
I'm
person.
not necessarily assuming that so much as just like
Yeah.
whatever it is going to affect who he is and what he does.
Yes. Yeah. But I believe that Iskril Puss has been around longer than Shadow Throne and Cotillion taking the thrones, respectively.
Really? I mean, I feel like he talks like a 12-year-old.
He's pretty
No,
old,
he's
I think, canonically.
totally stuck.
No, he's an old man. He's
Do you know 12-year-olds that talk like that? What kind
Yeah,
of
I'm
kids are you
worried.
hanging around?
Anyway,
those 12-year-olds have been smoking a lot of crack, like from the day they were
So,
yeah, I
like
do we
mean,
want to
born.
that makes
spiral
you stronger.
into the Fiddler, Absolar, Crocus, Kalam plotline, or do we want to go back to the prologue?
Maybe well, we could do Mappa Akarium since
I wanna get to the prologue just because I think the prologue is a banger. Like,
Okay.
it is a
seriously.
banger.
It is a banger.
Something we have not mentioned so far is that the prose is just better in this book than it was in Gardens of the Moon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's not close.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Just like straight up, there are lines that are poetic, the flow is stronger, just the sentences are more frequently just kind of hitting you. You feel a little more just pulled into things by the lyricalness of it all. It's been like a week since I finished book one, so I don't have like lines that are sticking in my head just because, I'm not going out of my way to memorize lines, but there have definitely been them.
I also feel like the scene writing is just stronger. Like, I remember, like, the prologue of Gardens of the Moon is something that I remember, but I feel like the sequence in this prologue of like them starting like chained up and them going to the docks and like everything that happens and like the people trying to get them and then Bowden like saws off the woman's head and everyone freaks out and they finally end up like that whole sequence is just a lot more compelling and dynamic, but it's
Yeah.
also paired with better prose. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think
there's so
it's
many
a
like
really good opening.
There's so many like sensory details or like just small details that stand out that Erickson adds that like really elevate every scene from like, yeah, there's battle or like, yeah, this horrific thing's happening that like really throws you in it. And I'm not saying he didn't do that in Gardens. I'm just saying like I don't remember it in Gardens. And then as soon as Deadhouse Gate starts, it's like, okay, like we're here, we got the flies, it's horrible. There are so many gross bugs in this book. I'm just gonna say that now. Like I was looking
It's bad, bad.
I was looking at the notes that I took when I read Deadhouse Gates, and like there are so many mentions of horrible bugs. And Werb, you have not gotten to some of them yet, so I won't spoil what these horrible bugs are, but they're horrible and I hate them. Anyway, all this to say, I don't think Erickson's prose was bad in Gardens, but I think in Deadhouse Gates it like there's so many like details layered into every scene that he just does so seamlessly that it feels much more immersive to me.
Like one detail from the prologue that I remember is when I think it's Saborik is like covered in flies, but the flies aren't stepping on his tattoos. Like they're avoiding them. It's just little things like that where it's like, oh yeah, this is like alluding to because Saborik he's a priest of Fenner, I believe has been said. If not, it'll be said objectively.
No, it was established
It
there.
was.
Yeah.
That was
So there's
basically
like
the first thing we learn about him. It's like
Yeah.
he's a priest, he's got no hands.
boars,
He's tatted.
which has like the kind of funny moment where like everyone's chained by their wrists, and then it gets to
Yeah.
Saborik and he's chained by his ankles, and it goes back up to
Yeah.
the next person. Which like isn't funny, but like
It's
is
horrible,
also really
but it's
funny.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have any hands. But
What are you gonna do?
They
So
solved the problem.
what do you think of the character the trifecta that is introduced in that prologue? And I guess we can talk about their arc because they don't have a
Yeah,
ton
I guess.
this section.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about both the prologue and that plotline in general. I gotta say, I like them in concept. I feel like their plotline hasn't really showed off them as a group much. Like Fellison is kind of not secluding herself, but kind of inherently in a position where she's kind of doing her own thing and has even a little like, interpersonal distance between her and the others while they're, in the work camp jail. But I like the concept for sure. I just feel like we got to see more of it. And I think, the way that concept starts, just, people who are chained together and trying to survive here, that is just really compelling. And, the entire situation in general that Fellison starts in is like, there are so many things I feel like I have to say about that. And the first is that it's such an interesting way to start book 2 relative to book 1. Because it's like, okay, the sibling of a character who was one of our main characters in a position that she was put into by the other sibling, and so there's inherently like that connection there. Jumping from one sibling to another is sort of a move that feels right going from one book to the next. In addition to like moving forward in time, it's like moving across the family tree. But it's also a consequence of everything that happened in book 1, because Tavor was promoted because Lorne was killed, and Tavor had to show her loyalty because Paran's loyalties were in question. And because of that, she needs to, do this whole purge of the nobility and not spare her sister from it, which, like, I think a huge marker of good writing is when the situations themselves are so creative and so inherently interesting that they just make you think about what the characters are feeling, even when those characters are not in focus at all. And that's obviously not the only dimension to good writing. There's good writing that is entirely about the execution and not at all about the originality of the scenario. But I still think they say that execution matters more than ideas, and it does, but there's also ideas on a certain level that amateur writers are not coming up with them. And you only really see ideas that are that good from people who really know what they're doing. And that is what this whole dynamic between Fellison and Tavor is. We don't need to see it from Tavor's side. Just the implications alone are fascinating. And on top
Some
of
of
that,
us need to see it from Tavor's side, and we're fucking impatient.
So
I am upset.
Little shock here. Eve is a little bit obsessed over Fellison and Tavor.
oh yeah,
I am
don't think that
normal
should be a
about
surprise.
fictional women, and I'm really extra normal about fictional women who suck and fictional women who are siblings. So basically, when I
And
read
fictional women who are lesbians.
that too, but when I started Deadhouse Gates, I was like, Duck, if I'm not into this book, like by the time I finish it, I'm dropping Malazan. And he was like, don't worry, like that's not happening. And yep, I met Fellison, and Duck was like, oh my god, you met Fellison, like what do you think? And I was like, whatever, like a guy turned into flies, that was whack. And then like 30% of the way into the book, I was like, fuck. Fellison is the best character of
Okay,
all
I
time.
mean,
They
I
got
mean,
me.
I feel like
But I was like not hooked on Fellison in the prologue, but I think like in her very first chapter when she's at the work camp,
Yeah.
like I feel like in like the first book we didn't get a lot of like POV fuckery. Sorry, is this PG?
whatever.
Is this
No,
PG?
no, don't
No.
worry.
Okay. We didn't get a lot of filtering the story through the lens of the like character. Like we kind of like we had it from like Paran, and like Paran kind of told it as it was. And like same with Tattersail and like all that. But like Paran had like a bit towards the end where he was like really obsessed with killing Lorne, but that was kind of like very obviously magic. Whereas just reading Fellison's like chapters and being like, oh, like she has like had it in her head now that she's like, a girl boss who's like using her sexuality, but like actually she's just like a kid being abused. And like it was like so good, and like that I think was like the best writing that I think Erickson did for me up until then. I don't know, at least for me, I felt like immersed in like Fellison's character in a way that I haven't really for any other character except one in House of Chains right now.
Yep, that's exactly how I felt. Like I would stop reading and I would have to blink and be like, okay, what's happening? Where am I? Because like when you're in Fellison's head, you're like so in Fellison's head, and everything is horrible.
You're like, I'm Fellis.
Yeah, you're
like I am
Fellison.
Fellis.
And like the thing is, Fellison, divisive character. We can talk about it. But like,
I don't
fuck
think
you
I
if
don't
you
think
hate
Fellison is going to
Fellison.
be divisive in this call. I'm not going to
No,
lie.
I don't think she's gonna be here. But like, no matter how you feel about Fellison, even if you're like wrong and hate her, when you're reading her sections, you're going to feel something. And I think that for me, going through Gardens, I didn't really feel that much towards most of the characters. There were some exceptions, but it definitely did not feel as immersive as like the very first Fellison chapter. You're in her head, you're seeing all these horrible things happen, and you're seeing why they happened, but she's not really able to understand that and like grasp the larger context. And it's just heartbreaking. She's a baby.
I will say I've heard the story many times that you were not liking Deadhouse Gates, Eve, and then 60% of the way through you suddenly loved it. And I was reading the prologue with all this Fellison stuff, her being a girl, more than her
Yeah,
just
you
literally
could just stop
not
there.
not just her literally being a girl, but her going through things as a girl going through loss of innocence, which I know is another big hit with you, loss of innocence, and then that
Uh-huh.
being because her sister. And I was like, are you telling me Eve didn't love this book from frame one? This is like the most Eve pandering thing I've ever seen. How did it take you 60% of the book?
It's why I
Because
recommended it to Eve in the first place.
And I mean,
the
to be
reason is
fair,
because I'm an idiot. And
well,
I read the prologue and there was too much going on. Like, I know I complain about this a lot. I love this series. I reread the prologue once I was Fellison pilled and I was like, this fucks. But like, there was just so much happening that I did not understand that I couldn't even get to the like emotional level. Like, I was still on the level of like, did this guy turn into flies or was he flies? Like, I was stuck on that for
No.
like days.
I will
No,
also
that's fair.
say,
That's fair.
once I got into the rest of the book, which I do think is like well written, but not Erickson's best, and doing a
Mhm.
lot of slow build up and being pretty confusing, I totally see why you weren't in love with the book yet. But that prologue, I mean,
It's a
No, he
banger.
it was
comes out of the
interesting
gate
stuff.
swinging. Like he was ready, and I love it.
I will say a lot of what I'm hearing you guys say about Fellison's plotline, I kind of agree with. I don't want to get into the issues I have with that plotline, which are minor and mostly just things I expect to get better later, but I don't want to get into my issues with it later. I do agree with what I was hearing about how the prose is pretty strong at bringing you into Fellison's mind, and I do think that's something he was not doing as much in Gardens of the Moon, and that's done well here, but I feel like I wasn't blown away by it, and I'm not sure if it's because I still think it could get better at using the prose to pull us into a sort of headspace, or if it's just that like my minor issues with that plotline were keeping me from getting fully into it. But I'll get to those later because I do want to focus on the prologue for now. Because the other thing that I really love about the prologue is the scenario in terms of, the nobles being enslaved, basically. Because, they talk, there's that whole concept that, like, you give I'm probably butchering this, but it's like you give the people bread and circuses, and that's what keeps them pacified. And this is their circus, and that's really interesting because there's this division between the nobles and the actual empress, which from my perspective, it's like this is both people in power, and if the average person hates the nobles, they should probably hate the empress too. But I can also see how culturally they would have this divide that makes them not look at it that way. And it's interesting how that's, keeping them divided is kind of used to, essentially control the proletariat.
I mean, I think like you have to like think about this less in terms of like it's not a feudal society where like it goes like the power of the emperor filters down to like the nobles, filters down to the people. It's more like
Yeah,
ancient Rome where there's like almost like three classes. There's like the emperor who's like above everything, and there's the nobility as a separate class, and then there's like the
yeah. I
commoners as
mean,
a
I say
separate
that.
class. The nobility,
I'm not
yeah.
saying that, that Lacine's power is filtered through the nobles. Like, I can see how they're kind of autonomous entities who can, definitely be, screwing over the proletariat. I'm more saying that, like, a lot of the people's issues come from those with power over them, and that applies not just to the nobles, but also to, the leadership of the empire. And, I can see how they're kind of put in a position where they're appeased with, torturing one to keep them from, getting mad at the other.
I think like there's like a pre like Russian Revolution like phrase which was like I think like God is like on high and the Tsar is far away. So like it's actually like I think both at least in Russia and in France like in the pre-revolutionary stage before things like really like escalated, it was like the peasants like might hate like the nobility, like like who are like directly oppressing them, but they saw like the czar or the king or still whatever as like a far away like father who is like
Right.
benevolent, and like it's why like also like I mean, and like partially it is for show, but it's why like when like someone initially raises like a rebellion, they always say like we are targeting the evil advisors next to the king. Like we're not targeting the king himself, even though like ultimately that might still be the goal,
Yeah.
but like there's still like I think a separation between like the like empress who like she might not be like she might not know about like the proletariat suffering, but like she surely wants like to help us, like she cares for us, and then like the nobles who are more like directly involved.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see that kind of taken to the extreme here, where the Empress is intentionally using that against, not really against the average person. I mean, it's obviously much more against the nobles, but she's using it as a tool in, how she exerts control over the empire in general.
I think one of the things that I like about the fact that that's included in the prologue is that in Gardens of the Moon, we know that an imperial strategy is to cull the nobles to get the people that they conquer to like the Malazans. Like
Mhm.
that's part of their game plan, which is why when Dujek burns the list of the nobles at Pale, I think it is, that was kind of like an act of rebellion because the Malazans want to like clear those people out and then put loyalists in charge and take over all the industry and stuff like that. So I think from a reader perspective and from the reactions I've seen, this can happen a lot. There's a lot of people that get to that part of Gardens of the Moon and they're like, wow, based Malazan Empire, eat the rich? Hell yeah, let's go. Right? Because there are certain people that are just like, if you're killing rich people, I'm in. Like, let me throw the first stone. Like, I got this.
It's
Especially in like
almost like the
fiction.
world is more complicated than that.
Yeah, because then you get so you hear about that in Gardens of the Moon, and Erickson does this a lot, really well throughout his writing, where he will introduce an idea in one book, and then you'll see it in a later book. So you don't actually see a call in Gardens of the Moon; you just hear about it, and then here at the beginning of the prologue,
Yeah,
you
I
see a
think that
call,
that's
and it
part
is
of what
like,
makes it so visceral, because it's like we kind of subconsciously, if we've been paying attention, know this kind of thing was happening, but it feels distant. And then,
You're
this
thrown right into it.
this this super well written, super evocative prose, super descriptive. It forces us to confront the reality of the suffering. And like
Yeah.
confronting the reality of the suffering is part of what makes this so interesting. So I think the thing that makes it so interesting to me is how it engages with the whole question of like, is violence, suffering, killing of those who are in power justified when, they have been oppressing others? And I think that's, a whole philosophical debate that could go on for a long time, and I don't really want to get into in full. Like, is it right to kill a noble person who is, a living, breathing person who, loves and has a life and has potential, if, that's for the sake of ending the suffering they bring to others? And then what about, the child of one, Fellison? Fellison is like, just an innocent girl who writes poems, who like was not in a position to like know better, was definitely not in a position to just be like, okay, I'll stop being a noble, or like to, change what her noble house does. And I don't even know if her noble house was really a bad one. I mean, probably wasn't great, but it's also like we don't know the details. And it's like, can you judge complicitness in children? Is don't hurt the children then something that ends up functioning as a defense of oppression? I don't know. I don't want to get into those questions, because I think that, the people I'm in this call with and, the people listening are smart enough to, understand the complexities of those things. What I find so good here is the fact that Fellison's perspective essentially doesn't matter. And I think that's compelling because, like, I think there's a tendency to think that like a person feeling the right things is something that has an influence. Like it's like if you're a rich person but you have the right political beliefs, does that make you good? And like maybe, I mean, there are people who are probably some level of rich who, have a net positive effect on the world. But the point is, like, Fellison knows that she is a privileged noble. Fellison knows why the people hate her. Fellison isn't trying to say, no, you all shouldn't hate me. She isn't trying to say, like, I'm innocent, let me go. She understands she's in that situation. She understands why she's in the situation. And none of that saves her. It's like how Fellison feels about it is basically irrelevant. Fellison is in this situation, and the situation is unchangeable because of, the forces around her, the circumstances. That this is, where the Empire was, that it needs something like this.
I will also say that, like, in terms of the political ethics, I don't think that this purge is a genuine attempt to, like, get rid of the concept
Oh
of
yeah, that too.
nobility
Not at all.
or to destroy the nobles as a class. I think this is very much well, they're getting a bit too uppity, so let's make an example of one or two of
Yeah,
them.
and
But, like,
and
it's not something that's meant to fundamentally change the
yeah, and
system.
I don't think that this is necessarily a situation where we're like actually measuring the harm of Fellison's family against the harm that family causes, like the harm the family causes versus the harm they're experiencing in a utilitarian kind of way. But it's more just like what Fellison represents to the people, the people who want to see a noble suffer versus, the suffering Fellison is feeling, and whether she deserves that is like a representation of that moral dilemma. Which also then, parallels that scene with Fiddler and Crocus and Absalar later, where they save a girl who was going to get raped when they were removing the Malazans from the city they were passing through, which was a hell of a scene as well. And we'll probably get into that one later, but like it's definitely something the book wants us to think about in general. Like, does societal change kind of have these consequences of hurting people, and like, are you willing to face the fact that that harm is occurring?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who would pound the table for something like the noble call that you see at the end at the beginning of this book, as long as they don't actually have to see it, you know.
Yeah,
But when you act like what the series does a lot is it'll say, okay, like if this is what you want, like if this is what you're advocating for, let's play this tape until the end and see what happens. And
yeah,
yeah, of course, a 15-year-old girl's going to get swept up in that because that's how these things tend to work. And if you're okay with, you can't really sit there and be like, well, my call of the nobles wouldn't do this. We would be
yeah.
more
I
judicious,
just do
right?
it
Like,
better.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, I
skill
think
issue. Like when my utopic society
Or
is
it's like,
instituted, you know.
or like, I think you could do it better, but
Oh
that
yeah,
takes
definitely.
work. That takes, and you could do it in a way that's an actual revolution and not just, a tool to, keep the nobles in line. but like, are you willing to fight to hold yourself to that standard? Is that worth it to you? Are you going to, settle for what you can get, even if that causes harm? And, some people will. I mean, I know people who I think, in a way, I sympathize with say, like, things need to get better. And if, we can't, let actually making things better get interfered with by the, things that are ultimately comparatively small. I understand that perspective, but it's at the very least something you need to think about. And that's what I think works so well about Malazan here and the way it's written is that, it isn't telling you what to think about it. It's just showing you, and you can have the reaction that you will have towards seeing that this suffering is happening.
It's probably not possible to have a societal change bloodlessly because people will fight back. And if people fight back, obviously, there likely will be bloodshed one way or another. But it seems to me that this purge, like many real life purges or pseudo revolutions, like the goal of this is not really any fundamental social change at all. It's a bloodletting to appease popular anger.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it a whole lot less justifiable than if Lacine was trying to, for example, fundamentally overturn how privilege and power and wealth worked. And there was pushback from the nobles, and there was either a civil war or a revolt, and it got bloody from there.
Yeah.
This is just Lacine seeing that people are angry, maybe seeing that the nobles don't like her or they threaten her power in some way, and deciding, let's just make a show of it. Like, let's have a game and kill off a couple people just to make people less
Yeah,
angry.
like,
It's purely a
it
scapegoat
is
situation.
within Lacine's power to like change and improve the structure of the empire. It would probably lead to, I don't know, a slightly worse economy or like a slightly less effective military or whatever, but like that would be worth it to, have a more equal and, a more equal society with less suffering in it. But, that isn't something, a leader like Lacine or like most leaders in a kind of time period like this really care about. And so she takes kind of the easy solution, which is to, kill some people that are convenient to kill.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Lacine herself, and I think Palanved and Dancer as well, were not of the nobility.
I
I
don't
think
think I know
Palanved.
that.
Yeah, you're getting into stuff that hasn't been
No,
talked
well,
about.
Well,
okay, sorry, they
we know
mentioned that.
Lacine.
No, they mentioned that
Yeah,
Surly
yeah,
used to be
yeah.
a
We do know that.
barmaid. Yeah, so yes, at least Lacine herself was not originally of the nobility, so she knows that some breakdown in the social order, some flexibility in that is possible, but she's not thinking in the terms of, well, why don't we abolish the nobility altogether?
Yeah. What I'll say is, in terms of like a moral stance, is that I'm not trying to have like a definite, absolute moral stance on this matter. Obviously, in reality, most situations you have to take individually. But, what I find so well written about this isn't that it, gives you a certain moral stance that I find agreeable. It's just that the scenario that it provides is a really interesting one to make you ask those questions.
I think the difference between how Erickson writes scenes like this and other stories that try to be like morally complicated is that when other like I've seen it done where morally complicated means, oh, you have to make a decision A or a decision B, and then I'm going to show you the fault with the decision that you made. It's like, well,
Like there's
you made me make a choice. Like, what do
that's
you want?
exactly like what I feel like is so interesting here, that like Fellison has no power to make decisions. Like again, she
Yeah,
knows why this is happening. She knows that like on some level nobles deserve like probably not this level of killing, for this, unproductive of a reason, but like nobles maybe don't deserve everything they have. What she thinks doesn't matter. There's no decision. Fundamentally, the state in the capital reached a point where things would be better, or at least more stable from Lacine's perspective with the calling of the nobles. Fellison, needed to be picked because Tavor needed to show her loyalties, and that's what the situation is. I feel like the logic that I don't like, and I don't think anyone here thinks this, but I think it's something I've encountered, is that like it's very easy to say like Fellison's a noble, Fellison is a privileged person, Fellison's whole existence as this girl getting tutored, writing poetry while people are suffering, being poor and having a terrible time. That they're like, just I have no sympathy for her in that position, and like I don't know. I guess I can see that, but then at a certain point, Fellison is not that person. at a certain point, Felicin is the person who is suffering in jail, who is, trying to maintain some level of control over her life, but is still fundamentally being abused. She is, in this horrible position. She is definitely, one of the disempowered in life now. And it's not that I'm asking at what point do you say, okay, she's suffered enough. Now she's someone we want, to give justice. No, it's that I find the asking of that question itself to be kind of a horrible thing. Like, we should never be in a position where we're looking at someone like Felicin and we're thinking she should have to suffer this much as, practically a sex slave in a work camp where she's definitely a work slave before we sympathize her again in spite of her being a noble. And I know that, like, no one here is asking that question, but that's still kind of what it makes me think of, and like a line of thought that I can see exist and I, distinctly want to avoid.
Well, I also think with Felicin, you get to the ways in which power can change very quickly. And like, she was someone who was like fairly protected and sheltered throughout her childhood, which is what you want in a childhood. And then she goes to a position where she is not at all, and everything is going wrong. And that happens incredibly quickly. And there isn't like a judge, like you said, that stops in and says, okay, like this is enough, turn off the faucet, you're good, go back, Like, no, now that you are in this position, you have to figure out a way to survive. And I think that especially with what we've seen so far, I like how the story is portraying like that sort of drive that she has to survive, and almost like I don't want to say willingness, but like the understanding that she has about like what she needs to do in order to protect her and her friends.
Yeah. And I think that's a good opportunity to kind of move forward into the plot line, because my one issue with the plot line is I feel like it skips enough that I'm just not totally like immersed in the scenario. We don't really see like Felicin getting to the jail or learning how to exist in the situation, or like making the decision that she wants to essentially give herself to Benneth for
Bennett,
the sake of, having, some safety and, bringing some protection to her friends. Like, it feels like we kind of just show up there once this dynamic is already in place. And I feel like I would, as much as the prose is really well written for pulling you into that scenario, I feel like I'm just not as immersed in it as I want to be because of that. And that kind of comes down to the way Erikson structures stories in general, where he is definitely improving compared to Gardens of the Moon. I mean, this is definitely smoother than, the first half of Gardens of the Moon and how confusing the Siege of Pale was. But it still feels to me like he doesn't have quite as deft of a hand as he needs to pull off this thing he's going for, where we only see, bits of stories. We don't really see like full narratives that we'd usually get in other books, but we get enough that it works anyway. It's an interesting choice for sure. It just doesn't feel optimal. And that's what I was thinking. But now that we're having this whole conversation about like Felicin and how much choice she has, I am thinking like there's kind of something interesting there, in that I feel like if we got the scene where she decides that she's essentially going to, be one of Benneth's lovers, that would kind of emphasize choice for her. And instead, we're kind of settling into this scenario more as just something that's happening and something she's accepted, in a way that doesn't emphasize choice, or emphasizes more of her lack of choice. I don't know if this necessarily needed that part to be skipped. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It makes me not look at her position as something she kind of chose. It makes me not look at it like, oh, she's making, choosing to make the sacrifice to protect her friends. And rather, it makes me look at it as like she was put in this horrible position where that was kind of the only choice she was able to make. And I feel like that's kind of interesting.
I think that it kind of highlights the tragedy of her circumstance in a way that it wouldn't if it stepped through like her descent, Like, I find it
Yeah.
very compelling and sad how we see like the prologue Felicin, and then it skips and we see her like completely disillusioned, innocence totally stripped away. She's stuck in this situation, and she is like trying her best, and in her mind these are the only choices she could have made. And I think seeing Haboric's judgy in this part, right? You got there?
Yeah.
Where he's kind of grumpy and like he's trying to protect her, right? Because she's making decisions that are hurting her.
Yeah,
But
like
in
literally.
her mind, they're the only choices she can make, and she's keeping
And
him
she
safe
is
and keeping
protecting him.
herself
Like,
safe.
it's
Yeah,
very strongly
she's being
implied that
effective.
he would have been, secretly killed off if she didn't, get
Yep.
him moved.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that skipping the parts where she actually makes those decisions, or like skipping the parts where we could see the gears turning, is important to keep the ambiguity in that situation. Now, I'm
Yeah,
not saying we needed to keep the ambiguity in that situation, but I do think it provides an interesting layer of conflict between Fellison and Haboric, and it's not a spoiler to say that like that will continue. Like
Yeah.
they have just fundamentally different ideas of what needs to be done in this situation and the way they look at the world. And I think if we had gotten more of that laid out clearly here, to me it would have been less compelling.
Yeah, and I agree that works, but to me it's kind of like it's like again, the hand is just like 80%, 90% there in terms of how deft it needs to be to pull all these things off. But then it's like there's little angles where like it doesn't hit as hard for me as it could because we haven't seen enough of Fellison and Heboric. I say Heboric, though you said Heboric. We don't see enough of their relationship, where like we kind of skipped ahead from their first meeting to this already being established, where like that might, I think, like even if the side of it that we skip to Fellison already, being here, we skip the fall is compelling, the side of it of like that relationship, I think would be more compelling if we see what it was before she made that fall. And that's the kind of thing where like maybe this is the optimal decision, maybe gaining what we get from skipping it is more than what we lose by, not skipping it or lose by skipping it. But I think the perfect version of like this approach to plot structuring would be able to like not lose anything. I think it is possible to like perfectly choose what happens and how, you use chapters to show those things such that there are no holes. And I think we're just still not quite there.
Not to have a boss baby moment, but I think this happens in Way of Kings pretty perfectly. I just reread it, and I think Kaladin's like seeing him set up as this like godlike figure and only from the perspective of other people, and then by the time we get to his POV, he's like totally beaten down, he's in the slave wagons, and then it like just gets worse. I feel like
Yeah.
that's a slightly cleaner version of
Yeah,
what
I
Erickson
think-
was going for here.
I
Because
think
we
that
don't see
nails it.
Fellison like happy. One must imagine Fellison happy. We don't get to see it. We only see like the prologue version, which is just a snapshot of this horrible thing happening to her that she has no control over. And then we see her in this other horrible situation as a completely changed person. So I feel like I don't have a sense, aside from like the poems and like the couple mentions we get of her in book one that we don't care about at the time, because like whatever. We don't have a sense of like how far she's fallen. And I do agree that it makes the emotional impact a little bit less.
Yeah. And like I don't
I do think, sorry, can
Yeah.
I say something? I do think that emphasizing the lack of choice is intentional on Erickson's part, because Fellison is at a point where she thinks she's making the choices that will give her more power. She thinks that she's weaseled herself into a relatively privileged position within the camp system, and that she's in a position where she can help her friends. But at this point, she's also essentially a drug addicted 14-year-old
She's 16.
prostitute. So,
Yeah,
oh,
Yeah,
she's
she
16?
she
Oh, that's
turned
fine.
16,
That's
she
fine.
turned 16 while in the jail.
Okay, well, I mean, if she's a
Happy
16-year-old drug
birthday.
addicted prostitute.
Yeah, that's okay.
Here's your
But,
birthday drugs.
but I do think emphasizing the lack of choice is definitely intentional. I see a lot of what's going on with Bennett, his
Yeah.
name
Yeah,
is,
his name's
right?
Bennett.
With Bennett as Fellison doing a post hoc rationalization of like things that happened to her, where she is imagining it in a way that makes it more empowering for her.
Yeah, and like
And
like-
I think that ambiguity is definitely intentional, because Bennett and Fellison is not, it's obviously not meant to be a good relationship
No.
no
at all.
shit.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very I
Fellison
feel like
is
it's
not in a good situation.
it's not, a big leap to understand that she was probably never in a position to really say no. Even
Yeah.
even if he was not going to be physically violent if she said no, it's like she probably needed to survive, like which
Yeah.
and to be clear, like
It's a forced choice in some ways.
there is and like I feel like we're kind of
Yeah.
talking about this narratively And like I do want to be clear that like this is a horrible thing we are reading her go through, and it is, I think this is handled maturely, I think, by the book, and it's still like something that's so horrible that it feels like a little bit exploitative to be like reading it in a narrative, but that's also just what makes it compelling and what makes it so the book is able to say things through something that horrifying.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think I didn't bounce off of it, but I definitely had some friction with the early Fellison stuff because of the exploitative angle, I guess, where it didn't feel like the narrative was condemning it in the way that I'm used to seeing narratives condemn this kind of thing. Because
Yeah.
Erikson doesn't do that. He doesn't go like, by the way, Bennett's a horrible rapist and you
Yeah.
should
Because
hate him.
it really is Fellison's perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
And he doesn't even Fellison isn't really making like value judgments in the same way that like a lot of authors would sort of interject, because a lot of authors don't trust their readers in the same way that Erikson does, where he's like, okay, I have faith that they can figure out their feelings about this situation. And to me, that was a little uncomfortable because obviously I had feelings about the situation, but seeing it through Fellison's eyes, she, like Lynn said, rationalizes a lot of it and is sort of telling herself this not happier, but like this version of the narrative where she has any sense of control or power, and she really doesn't. And I think that that is a very painful angle that I'm impressed with how well he did it, but it does feel uncomfortable
Yeah.
to read.
Yeah.
I think it also makes the conflicts that she has with Haboric and I don't know if she has conflicts with Bowden as much in this section. I'm not sure
Not
actually as
yet.
much.
No.
But yeah, when she gets into conflicts with Haboric, you have to sort of think about it from his perspective, not in like the obvious way, but in the sense of he might be saying that same thing to himself of like she is putting herself in the situation because she is like self-sacrificial and this is like doing something for her psychologically, but this is really fucking her over in the long term and like this needs to stop.
Yeah.
So that's and obviously Fellowson is going to be in conflict with that because from her perspective, like she feels like she's doing so much for them. And so their disagreement, and they don't really have like a way to resolve this in terms of, objectively if it's helping them or if they're hurting them. They're just sort of going off of their instincts of what they think is best. I think that's what makes their conflict like really compelling and true to form, where it's not like, yeah, Fellison is doing this and it's great and she's making all these sacrifices and Hebborg is ungrateful for everything that she's doing. That might be Fellison's perspective, but I don't think that's what the narrative wants you to take away.
I think like I read Song of Ice and Fire before reading Malazan. And so I mean, obviously it was still uncomfortable to read, but Fellison's plot arc wasn't as shocking to me as it might have been to Eve. And I actually think that compared to how it's handled in Song of Ice and Fire, the stuff with Bellison is handled a lot better. And I do think there's value, I think, in having the time skips because I think showing everything would almost feel too
Yeah.
exploitative in the way that I don't want to spoil Song of Ice and Fire, but like some stuff in book one of Song of Ice and Fire um feels like a similar to Felison and Hebor not Heboric, Felison and Benneth, but because it's presented in so much more detail and for much longer, it ends up feeling a lot worse and a lot more
Yeah.
romanticized.
I sort of am reminded of this manga called A Cruel God Reigns, which is like basically its main plot is somebody getting pretty horribly abused. I think that manga does use that effectively because it uses like the slow pacing and showing every step at it to sort of show like how it can feel like someone's trapped and feel like there's like no escape. But at the same time, like you could call it exploitative, and I don't think there's really an argument against that. I think there is a bit of a need for me right now to like wait to see what Deadhouse Gates is seeing as a book because like spoiler alert, I don't have like a full analysis of its themes yet from just the first 25%. And so I feel like we do need to see like in context, of everything the book is saying, what Fellison is going through.
This is a bit of a tangent, so you might want to cut this. But in terms of like something being exploitative and something not being exploitative, it is really hard to draw the line because some of the stuff that in Song of Ice and Fire comes off as exploitative is not actually as bad as some of the other stuff that happens in Song of Ice and Fire. But like it feels weird to say like, oh, like someone being abused in this one scenario comes off as like the narrative being kind of exploitative, but someone being like graphically tortured in another scenario or like tortured pretty badly off screen in another scenario isn't. But it is kind of a value judgment based on how it makes you
Yeah.
feel.
And
But
like
so it does feel weird to say this isn't exploitative, but this other thing is. But even if it's subjective, I think there is some value in saying that, but the line is going to be different for
yeah, and
everyone.
like someone can read a story and like basically already understand what it's trying to communicate and just like not get anything out of it and just be made uncomfortable for no reason, while another person can read the same story and like through the story gain empathy for a situation that they didn't have the full tools to empathize with before. The sort of general like judgment of like this story is this story is that is like usually an oversimplification of how it actually works to like have different people react to a story and to like judge what that effect is that it has on different people.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do think, everything we're saying about like what's compelling and like how it portrays, Felison's lack of choice and how she tries to cope with her situations and how part of that is achieved through like it kind of skipping ahead is totally true. And it is just like I'm not saying the book should have showed more and it would be better and it's as simple as that. More just like there are it's more like the
Yeah.
art of structuring a book is not if there's a hole, put in a chapter to fill that hole. It's juggling all the little things of how like one subplot would be better with a little more, but then if you put that in, that affects, how we build up to another chapter. And if you put in like everything to fill in every little hole, then you have a way longer book. And Malazan books have so many plot lines that you can't really do that. And it's like I honestly expect that by the end of Malazan, Erickson will be so good at juggling those things that there will be practically no holes. And so far, he is just still working on it.
Do you want to talk about Mappo and Ikaria?
Yeah, sure.
We want to talk
I
about
think we
another
covered
plotline now.
most of what we have to say about Felison. Oh, wait, there's one last thing I have to say about Felison. I'm actually a little disappointed by her, but not in a serious way. But I heard so much about Felison being controversial, and I don't think I had specific spoilers, but I got the vibe that long-term Felison is a character who does things in a more stabby kind of I don't know if she stabs people. I don't know. I just got the vibe that she will become the kind of character who I don't know how to I don't want to get specific because I feel like if I get specific, it's probably like specific enough that it's not accurate because the spoilers, I feel like the vibe-based spoilers I got
The vibes are correct. Yeah, Bellison has some stuff going on
the
later.
the vibes I got before I even started the series is that Felison is someone who takes control of her life by maybe taking life away from others. And I figured that would be why she's controversial. And so I'm like, damn, I'm a quarter of the way through this book, and we still haven't gotten any of that for Felison. And obviously that's because there's an actual story being told here, and it's not just here's a, depressed girl who stabs everyone book. But are there any Here's a Depressed Girl Who Stabs Everyone books? Now I kind of want to read one.
I mean, there's like Arya Stark and Song of Ice
Solar.
and
We already
Fire.
have
I'll get to that
Axelar.
eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Point being, obviously there's an actual story to get through for Felison,
He doesn't
but it's
stab
like
as
it's not
many
what I
people as you
expected.
want. as you
But then
want her
again,
to,
I'm
though.
like, I think you guys mentioned to me earlier that even as early as this, Felison is controversial, and I cannot remotely see the reason to see Felison as controversial at this point, other than like literal misogyny or just lack of reading comprehension. Because like, what is there to hate?
It's both. It's both. It's both. It's both.
Yeah, it's those. It's those. It's those. That's it. That's all. It's people who say like, "Oh, she's like a whiny little girl. She doesn't understand. She's like so stupid and like so ungrateful to what Haborik's doing." It's like, what is Haborik doing?
I feel like I would, in theory, have fun going into exactly why those takes are so dumb, but they are so dumb that there's like I can't even think of a thing to say about it. That's just not the book. That's not the book that you read. And if you think you read that, then try getting better at reading.
So I think an element is that with a lot of stories in fantasy particular, it goes the arc of this person gets shit on and abused, and then they find a way to get back at whoever is doing this to
Well,
them.
no,
You know,
well,
Spoilers, no
either
no,
by
spoilers.
becoming
no,
like a dark, edgy
I think what
assassin,
Don't spoil anything. We haven't
or
gotten
whatever.
that far.
No, I'm not going to spoil it.
no,
I think it's obvious from what we've read so
Starts
far
murdering
that this
people,
is not going to be
it's
like a
still going to be her
Fellowson
having a
murders
terrible
everyone in
time. I
power
can
fantasy.
predict
That is
that much
not what this book is
confidently.
about.
No, like I think the
Yeah,
kind of
this is
book
not
people
like
would
a
expect if they're more
we're gonna
used to
get
like
back
that
at
kind
the
of narrative
abusers type
is
of
that at the part
story
where
or
like
anything
Bennett
like
beats
that. And
Fellowson
so
because like the captain recognized her as a noble and like Bennett doesn't know that and he like wants to know the truth and he like leaves her lying there in a ditch. Like I think people would expect that to be Fellison's point where she's like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna start stabbing people. I'm gonna work my way up the ladder. I'm gonna stab Bennett, then I'm gonna stab his boss, then I'm gonna
and then
stab
with
his
her
boss's
quick
boss,
wits, she
I'm gonna
sneaks in
keep
a
on
knife
stabbing
and
people
slits his
until I'm
throat while they
stabbing
have fun.
Lacine. And it's like, no, she is traumatized. She is drug addicted because it was her only way of coping with the horrible things she is going through. She is a broken person, and getting through that kind of thing is not just a switch that flips once the suffering gets bad enough.
But have you considered she's a teenage girl and therefore she should kill herself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the people who blame Fellison, because it is blaming, like, they're like, why does she make those decisions? Why doesn't she just stop taking Durhang and stop fucking Bennett? Then it's like, that just is not the point. Like, you're not reading the right story.
You're getting me to actually love the fact that it skips over like what brought her there. Like I like that choice a lot more than I did at the start of this call because like yeah, like what's compelling about it is that you see this and you actually have to think like what brought her here because it's very implicit what brought her here. Like it's not like it doesn't like take, a conspiracy board of theorizing to figure out why she's in this position, but it is something you have to do yourself. And doing it yourself makes you kind of process like how you feel about those decisions in a more direct way than if you were just like told what happened.
There's another element of that that I think we can also talk about in the context of some of the other plot lines, which is, and you also see this a lot in Guards of the Moon, which is that oftentimes when you run into people who are broken in some way and are doing bad things or in bad situations to cope, you don't see the entire story, right? You see Bellison where she is at Skullcup, where she's sleeping with the guard and getting these benefits and whatever. And if you're just like, I don't know, for example, that captain who like kind of recognizes her and is like, what the fuck is even happening right now? You don't She's not just gonna be like, well, let me tell you my RPG NPC dialogue style backstory of all of the things that happened to me that put me in this situation. You can decide whether or not, like, no, you don't get that. And so with the narrative and with the structure of the book, you get a little bit more because you see the prologue. But with Fellowson and then with some other stuff in this book and then throughout the series, a lot of times you just see the coping. Like you just see someone who has gone through some awful stuff and is trying to survive. And then you can either cast judgment on that person and say, Fellowson shouldn't be doing this. She should be blah blah blah. And in this part of this book specifically, I don't think there's room for criticism, to be honest. Later on, it's also not a spoiler to say like Fellowson is going to make other decisions that you can criticize. But with other characters, or even with honestly like the larger social structures that are at place with this book, because we'll talk about, I'm sure at some point, the Seven Cities Rebellion and the validity of that. Yeah, we don't have a ton for, but even still, like we're getting to the point of the narrative where that thing is moving, and you don't have the entire backstory. You don't have the 10, 15 years of occupation to really judge whether or not they're good to rebel or whatever. You're just suddenly in Skull Cup and you're seeing these person reacting. And like you have to, like you as the observer have to recognize the limitations of your own viewpoint.
In real life, you will come across people who suck, who are awful to be around, and everything's complicated, everyone's different. Some people just suck. But you're going to come across people who suck who are like have a story that you don't know. And this is not to say like, oh, just accept it whenever anyone's kind of stepping on you because maybe they were hurting in the past. Like, no, like everything, you have to balance, protecting yourself and, just, basic common sense. But that is still a factor that you have to consider. And like like you were saying, like with Fellison, we get the prologue. With Fellison, we're on easy mode of like understanding how to empathize with another person. If some people can't do that, well,
Yeah, if you fail easy mode,
But Werb, she's a teenage girl, so we don't respect her.
oh, teenage girl, the
She's
demographic
stupid.
that oppresses us the most.
The only valid character is like the male rational fixed self-insert.
no, listen. They weren't calling the nobles; they were calling the teenage girls.
Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, but it's Fellison Paran and the rational stabbing of everyone who's bad.
Of everyone who's a dick, yeah.
Yeah. uh
No, see, if I self-inserted into Fellison, I would be doing like pull-ups like on the ship. So when I get there, I would be super jacked, and then I would
And then I would
ninja skill
punch
my
them
way
in
to
the
stabbing
face.
everyone.
You
and
would
just
beg
like,
Cotillion to possess you so
Yeah.
you can obtain assassin skills and then use that to murder.
yeah,
no, but Lynn,
exactly.
no offense, but you might be the only person I know who, if you self-insert into Fellison, you would be doing even worse than she is.
Holy shit.
That's so mean.
That's the meanest thing that's ever been
Please
said,
cut
I
this
think.
from the official
No,
recording.
don't.
We're not
Okay.
scrubbing it.
If
Okay.
if I was Fellison, or if I was Lynn was Fellison on the ship over, I would simply get scurvy.
Yeah, no, you would not you would have died from tetanus from the chains. Like you're not making it on the boat. Sorry.
Okay.
So-
Okay.
No, that's true.
Okay.
That's
To talk,
true.
okay, so like I know that there's some momentum to talk about Mappo Akarium. I don't think we should talk about that yet. I
Mappo?
think we should Mappo and Akarium. I think we should talk about Duiker next because I think it is the most connected to Skull Cup. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, I mean there's some narrative momentum to like
Dwigter's
a
boring.
rescue mission. I will say though, like, yeah, I'm not super Duiker pilled yet. I think the plotline has been like ups and downs. Like it's a bit like on average solid. You know, it's a good book, but I'm not like in love with that plotline.
So there's a character in Song of Ice and Fire nicknamed the Camera That Rides because its entire point is to walk around observing the plot, and he has no personality whatsoever. And Dwaker is like that, except every now and again he'll go on a really long monologue that's like, in history books, blah 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 blah. People die. Damn, that sucks. Sadness.
Sounds like a cool
I'm
guy to
going to
me.
defend my boy
Kind of a
Duiker
banger,
here.
though.
I'm going to defend my boy Duiker here because he is a historian, and we talked a lot about in the last on the Gardens of the Moon podcast about the ways that Erickson is messing with the concept of history, but there is not a historian in that book. There is in this one, and so you get the perspective of Duiker, who is viewing things quote unquote objectively, like he is analyzing things through the lens of history. And so you get that. Now he has biases, he has perspectives. Obviously, the rescue mission is cooking up, and so he's
Yeah.
sort of put his hand on the scale against the Empire in that way. But it is interesting that now is the time where we get the perspective of the person who can talk about like the Empire and the people involved and the movements and the political stuff and the context with some level of authority because it's literally his job. And so when he sees, like, for example, the Wiccans come in and they're interacting with the Red Blades and all the stuff there, he's also a Seven Cities native, I think. I think that's established because he, like, goes undercover and people, whatever. So, like,
I thought he wasn't. I thought
does
was just
just
it-
look,
I
does
don't
he
think
just
he
look
is.
no, I
I
think
think
he just
like passes
yeah, I'm
for
pretty
one
sure he just
racially.
passes.
Okay, that's fine. So, but the thing is, like, he, at least from the Malazan perspective, like, he can talk kind of with authority about what's happening. So, like, when the Wiccans come in, he, like, talks about what they're doing and, like, Coltane, and that whole thing is obviously going to continue for the rest of the book. But, yeah, I agree that the plot hasn't really, like, picked up steam yet.
Yeah, like
But
I like it
think-
all in concept. I really want to see what Coltane does. It's just like stuff has got to start happening.
Yeah, exactly.
And
like,
there's been
that's
moments
going to happen.
that are cool, but like it's very like I think there's books where even the setup is like fascinating to read. That's I think the kind of thing Erickson isn't at yet. Where like I am sure all of this is set up that will be in retrospect vital, but like it's not as interesting as I think it could be.
And that's part of the trust in the reader of, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like the Wiccans, they are conceptually really interesting. And I do like the because I think it's easy to say, well, they are a barbarian horse culture Mongol knockoff and leave it at that. I do think it's interesting that Erickson goes out of their way to he goes out of his way to flesh them out and give them that depth, which I don't think is usually present, and it really does show his background as an anthropologist. However, I will also say that I think Erickson hypes them up a bit too much for me to like them because it's partially a me problem because I am naturally a contrarian. If I catch a hint of an author trying to make me like a character or group of characters, I'll be like, no, I'm not doing that now. But it does feel like Erickson is just he read a few too many books about the Mongols, and he's like, damn, the Mongols were so cool. They are so cool. What if the Mongols had like even better horses and like reincarnating child witches? That would be so cool.
I don't know. I feel like I don't have that problem because I feel like our perspective is a little suspicious of them. Like Duiker isn't like their
He's not
enemy.
Wiccan pilled at all.
He's not their enemy.
Yeah.
He's basically like aligned with them against like Malik Rel, but he's still like, he and Culp are kind of, not necessarily conspiring against Coltane, but they're like, they're conversing every now and then. There are some takes that only Duiker and Culp are in the loop on. And I like Culp, not super interesting, but I've liked his moments. And I don't know, I feel like that keeps us from. I don't think the book wants us to be like, hell yeah, the Wiccans, we're going to see them do things. I think it wants us to think like, they're cool, but like, we shouldn't necessarily be confident that we're always going to be rooting for them.
No, I think it's less they're morally good and more that they're morally cool.
Is that what is
I
morally
don't
cool?
know if I understand that, honestly.
I don't know. All right. I
No,
don't. You know
I
what?
just mean Erickson is hyping up
All
their
right.
coolness factor.
We know that is just Lynn. She said it herself, so I don't think we need to debate that.
But there's also like we haven't really met them enough, so like even talking about your impressions might be too.
Yeah.
Getting into
Yeah,
all
like the
spoilers.
thing, I'm kind of struggling to think of like what I have to say about this plotline because it feels like what we've gotten doesn't really show them off. Duiker's kind of dynamic with is Bolt his name?
Yeah.
That's fun.
Coltane's right hand man.
Yeah, I think that I like kind of when he talks with Culp and Culp is like, oh yeah, no, that's totally that same warlock. I just don't want to acknowledge it because I don't want him to know that I know. Like,
Yeah.
I thought that was fun. Like, I don't think Culp's gonna be a standout, but like I think that, I like his role here. I think one of the holes is the whole training thing with like the Seventh Army needing to be good enough against Coltane's and like, Culp is making all those fake civilians. Like that's a fun concept that Culp is making fake civilians that are really annoying for them to deal with. But
he's like magicking wounds too, because
Yeah.
he's
it's just I don't care about the Seventh Army, and I also like don't see this train like it's kind of just talked about. And it's like it's an interesting concept, and like I think it gets more out of this approach than most authors would. But it's just like I'm not sure this was like the right plot line exactly, or just there's like a lot of like different things that you could do to maybe improve it. And there's probably like reasons that it is the way that it is that'll become more clear as we see where the book goes. But it's just not super interesting to see like Duiker go talk to Bolt about like how the Seventh Army is doing and keeping up, because like I don't know why I'm invested in that.
I did like the scene. I think it's in this reading when Duiker is like, "Wait, Coltane, do you call him uncle because he's literally your uncle, or is that like a cultural thing?" And Coltane's like, "I don't know." Just call
Yeah,
him
and I
uncle.
like, and I also I like how like Duiker figures out that it's a cultural thing that he's not going to get an answer, and so he has to win by not asking until the other side gets impatient about it.
Yeah. So there's like a the Wiccans are culturally their own thing, even though they work for the Empire, and I think that's another aspect that the story is getting into because like empires obviously as they expand they bring in cultures under their banner, and that's happened with the Wiccans. Now in the first book we had like kind of Malazan loyal troops the entire time, but here like we're dealing with quote unquote Malazan soldiers that were once fighting against the Malazan Empire, as these things tend to go, which I think is just another interesting aspect to the setup.
I like when like he's first meeting them and they talk about like I think an encounter they had a while back where like they were on the different sides in the war and sort of what happened there. and I think how Duiker had like no weapons or armor, and that was neat. I feel like rather than try to analyze that here, I just want to see where the story goes. But like there are things that are being laid that are interesting.
Yeah, this is the plot line that for me when I was reading it was definitely like the okay, this needs to spend some time ramping up in the beginning and then
Yeah.
hopefully pay off.
It doesn't even feel like setup in the same way that like some of Erickson's front loading does. It just feels like, why do I care about this? Like it is set up, but it doesn't feel like, oh, we're laying the groundwork for like this interesting conversation that's going to happen. It's like we're just seeing Duiker walk around and talk to people, and I just was not invested in any of it.
The view, also the part where Duiker went and like infiltrated, like that was neat. And it's like again, like, if we wanted to like, go over the chapters again and go like moment by moment, there'd be lines, there'd be beats that would be interesting to analyze, but also this podcast is already going longer than we wanted it to.
Next
I don't
plot
know.
line.
No, the one thing I want to say is the low point of it for me is when they're like doing some investigation and like the magic baby mage. I know he's like 11, but like the reincarnated by crows mage sort of
Is that
brings
where
them.
they go into like kind of a Warren thing?
They go into the Talana Mass Warren,
Yeah,
and there's a
that
bunch
chapter
of
sucks. I'm not
there's a
gonna lie.
bunch of divers and soul taken there, which like I think the purpose of this is mainly to develop our like plot line of understanding like we have all these hints as to what the shapeshifters are doing and it's building to something, and that was like another part of that. But I do not remotely see why it's supposed to be interesting to see Duiker and Culp and all of them deal with that. That was just not.
No,
Like,
I think that section is
I
a
got
flop.
nothing out of that. That big flop.
Even on reread, I was like, yeah, this is. I mean, like it kind of just establishes that the Soul Taken and the Divers are going on the path of hands, and you get more of that with this
Yeah, and it's
and so it's like
but
more.
we
I
already
think it's
knew
more
that.
of a
We already knew
consistency.
that.
Yeah, I don't
Like we
think
know
that
we
is
the only
particularly
new
worth it.
information was that they were doing it by going through what's the Talanamas Warren name?
Talon.
Oh yeah, they were doing it through Talon.
Yeah, it's
Well,
because it's the
there's
Talon.
there's like nothing else like we got out of that. There's and like I don't even remember why like the warlock needed to do that, what they were trying to accomplish with that.
I remember rereading that scene and remembering that I didn't understand it and trying to find out why they were there, and I did not get an answer the second time that I read it. So
Yeah,
like,
all right.
yeah.
Let's move on from it. Can we talk about Mappo and Icarium now? So, here's the thing about Mappo and Icarium. This is some real Malazan shit. Like, this is what I was expecting. This is almost what I was hoping for when I started reading Malazan. Like, people say, oh, it's so confusing. It just jumps to a new place and you have no idea who these people are, who they're talking about. And that was kind of true in Gardens of the Moon. It was pretty confusing early on. There were some jumps, there were some, like, weird choices. But most of Gardens of the Moon was like, if you paid attention, you could see how it was connected into the same plot. And then I expected, okay, we're jumping to another continent with Deadhouse Gates, but first thing we get is related to Felison, who we knew existed and who's related to that plot. By the way, like, I love that Crocus and Apsalar are in this book. We haven't mentioned that yet, but I thought we wouldn't be getting back to them until Memories of Ice. I thought it was a total new cast. I love that they're in this, but that is also, again, not throwing us for a loop. But then, well, actually, before we know Crocus and Apsalar are in the book, we jump to Mappo and Icarium, and it's like, literally, what the hell are these guys doing? I do not know who these people are. I have no idea why this matters. They are just going through a desert and they are talking about things I don't understand. And like, to be clear, after I read that, I went to a friend of mine and I said, hey, you like the idea of a fantasy series that doesn't spoon feed things to you and just like drops you in a conversation with people you don't know talking about things you don't understand, you have to figure it out. You like that, right? Seriously, you should read these books because it's very cool that it does this. But like, that was the moment where it lived up to its reputation for me.
Yeah, like you don't know what race these people are, how old they are, like what even
Casually mentions
nothing.
Icarium's like green, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, he's
Guess
got
that's
tusks and all that.
I will say that like this is one of the times where I think it didn't work super well for me.
Oh, I'm not that attached either.
Because like
You're so
Like-
wrong for that.
I just never really got attached to Mappo and Icarium as characters. And that might be initially because I was just super confused. But at some point I was more focused on trying to solve the mystery than caring about their emotions or how they reacted. And I'm not usually a mystery over character kind of reader. So for me there was that extra distance from like me and the Mappo Ikarian plotline.
Fascinating because I mean, obviously I am like an emotional reader, but that was like they were probably the characters I was most invested in Malazan up till that point because like it's just like a hurt comfort duo and I was like what's going on? And like even though the plot like didn't make any sense and I thought it was kind of boring cuz like they're just walking and then they go see people and it's like okay, whatever. I thought that like their relationship was just so crunchy and so fascinating that it like carried me through all of the boring stuff that I didn't understand.
I don't know. I feel like it's a case. It's kind of the problem I talked about a lot about Gardens of the Moon, where sometimes it feels like we have characters going through a plot line that's not related to them, which can work, and I think at its best is like one of the things that makes this series so strong. But I do just like I feel like whatever's going on with Ikariam's memories and like why Mappo is like, hiding things from him and also defending him is pretty interesting. But then I don't feel like what they're doing or dealing with for the most part ties into that. I mean, the moment where Ikariam forgets that he fired his bow and asks why and Mappo lies to him is good, but that's like one thing where then like, I don't see what investigating what the shapeshifters are doing has to do with them. And I think part of the issue is also just that this is like the plot line with the least we understand. Like, I think it has the most kind of things that Erickson is withholding information on. Like, we don't understand what their goal exactly is, both materially or in terms of like what Ikariam wants in general. We don't understand how that relates to like this desert, if it relates to the soul taken thing. It's the one where we're the most kind of left dangling, and I think that contributes to like it being unclear like what things that are happening are supposed to connect to the characters.
Yeah, for me, I mean, there's a few lines that are definitely touching. For example, whenever Ikariam is like freaking out and Mappo tries to comfort him, or Mappo thinks about his responsibility towards Ikariam, there is some emotional tension there. But because it comes so out of left field and it feels like it happens kind of in a vacuum disconnected from the rest of the world that we've been presented with so far. It's hard for me to really get invested in it or to care too much about them as characters.
Yeah, and it's just like a lot of what they are doing, like when they show up to this temple and Iskarol Pust is there, it's like I'm not saying Iskarol Pust has to tie into whatever Ikariam is going through. He is clearly, he is an island of a man, and you know what? Respect. But
He is also a man of islands.
Iskro Pus is so cottagecore.
look, all I'm saying is I don't know like why they're at that temple or what they want to happen there. It wasn't clear if they were just like looking somewhere to stop for a bit or if this is their goal. I don't know if they're like are they just like aimlessly wandering for whatever and they're just like, well, seems like there's a mystery here. We might as well check it out. I don't know. And if it is supposed to be that, I don't think it communicates that clearly. And I don't want to be like hating on this plot line. It's more that just like it's not up to the standard.
I mean, I think Erickson is definitely cooking throughout the whole book. I think Mappo and Ikarian is comparatively weaker, but I can understand why some people really like it.
I don't know what a trell is. I'm not sure if I need to.
It's an ethnicity.
I know, but I don't know like anything about
It's
that
a
ethnicity.
non-human subspecies.
But I don't know what is about it,
He's-
And anyway,
Think orc, you're fine. No, that's all you
but
need.
I thought the Jagged are orcs.
Well, no, the Jaguts are big ice orcs. These are just orcs.
Okay. Well, at any rate, like I think what I do find interesting is that Ikariam is a half Jagut. Like when he was mentioned in Gardens of the Moon, it didn't mention that. And like I think that there will be an arc that I can't see yet of just how the Jagut are portrayed. Because when we saw Raced, he was like this, I was born to conquer and rule over, and I'm super powerful, and I'm just gonna do it. And I think that intentionally colors how we view their race, so that then when we see Ikariam, it's completely different. I'm not sure it's a subversion, because I think, most smart people won't be assuming all Jagut are like that when we know Raced was taken down by his own people, but it's still like a contrast where like Ikariam is a thoughtful, lost person who's probably not that strong, and like it's saying something, and it'll probably continue to say a more specific picture when we see how future Jagut are portrayed in the series. if there are any.
It really makes the Jagut genocide by the Talanamas seem a little less justified.
Wait, you thought the
You
genocide was
thought it was
justified before?
No, I'm saying I think when you're
Someone needs to read more Malazan.
don't pull my leg.
All right.
Yeah, I don't really have strong thoughts about this plot line as of yet. If whatever your opinion on it,
Yeah, I mean the mystery with like what is going on with the Karium's memories is cool. The part where they talk about like writing versus remembering is kind of neat, and like if that's a factor for him. And also I like the discussion of like a super old civilization that was prosperous enough to write super long things about relatively pointless topics. There's definitely like a theme in this book, more of a motif about old societies, the ancient things, like that ancient city that was, built on top of until it collapsed. I feel like, the desert itself is kind of a character in this book, and I feel like when we're at the end of the book, like something is going to kind of come up that all of that has been building toward. And so that aspect is neat, although that's also like not even that related to what Mappo and Ikarium are doing. It just kind of came up as it's come up in other plot lines.
I think what Mappo and Ikarium do in the narrative, at least up till this point, is mostly just fill the niche that Erikson loves to write of two dudes who like to have philosophical conversations while they walk around. And I think they do that pretty well. So, and I love when he writes that, so I'm kind of okay with it.
I think the conversations could be better. There's some all right ones, but I want more. And I think they have potential. To be clear, like when I talk about these plot lines where I think the characters feel like unrelated to the stories they're going through, usually that just means I want to like see more with the characters. Yeah, I think there's strong potential here.
Yeah, I don't think there's any bad characters in this book.
Also, I will be honest, Eve, the conversations that Mappo and Ikarium have feel less like wise philosophical discourse between two ancient beings and more like they're both really, really stoned and possibly on LSD.
One of them literally has dementia. That's offensive.
He doesn't have dementia.
I don't think they're high. I don't think you've ever been high, Lynn. I don't think that's quite it. But
I have not ever been high, but I imagine if you lie back, you take a hit of the joint, and you say like, "Damn, we really do live in a society." And then like you pass it to like the next person, they're like, "It's a society that we live in," and it just goes around.
I don't know. I feel like Mappo and Ikarium feel more like two like 45-year-old dudes who get a beer together every night, which like I think is kind of an interesting way to portray two really old people, like to kind of subvert, what we expect from people that old. But I don't know. I'm not loving the plot line yet.
45-year-old beer thing is like such a funny mental image to me because I think they're gay lovers. And like I
Shocking.
thought that from the first scene. They
Shocking.
have such I'm not saying their relationship like is romantic. I'm just saying it could be so easily. Like at any scene, Erikson could have just added like and then they kissed and I would have been like, yeah, all right. Like that checks out. And I think that to me their connection is so like tangible in every scene even if they're spouting nonsense or they're just walking around and we're getting unrelated information. I felt the connection between them strongly enough that I was like, that kind of carried me through in a way that usually did not happen to me with Erikson characters. So it's interesting to me that that relationship didn't work for you guys.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I actually agree slightly about the vibes and that I think there's something romantic to the vibes, but I'm just not feeling the depth there. Like I don't know, when I read, their chapters, I just wasn't feeling like their conversations were like that intimate. Like if anything it felt to me like people who could be talking intimately but like aren't.
Honestly, to me, like it's interesting that we all have entirely different readings of the Mappo Ikarian dynamic. Because to me, they felt like roommates, not in the oh my god, and they were roommates way, but like two like actual dudes who are living together, who have been living together for a long time, who probably have a really messy, dilapidated shit show of an apartment with beer cans and trash everywhere, who just sit on the couch and go, bro, every now and then. And like there is like an intimacy born out of familiarity and like genuine friendship but it doesn't feel like a heart-to-heart, genuine relationship, like, tangible in the way that Eve mentions it. It feels intimate in the sense that they've grown to know each other really well because they have been forced to be together for a long time, and so there's a level of genuine care,
I would say I
but
agree with how you're putting it, except I would not say they're forced to be together. I think they do choose to be together, and I think that is a meaningful
well,
difference.
circumstances force them to be
I don't know. I
together.
think it's a little more than that, but I agree in general that like I don't know. I can't like call to my head exchanges they had that feel super personal.
Yeah.
All
To me,
right,
it
I've
feels
heard
like
enough
the
Mappo and
vibe.
Akarian fan fiction.
No,
Get-
I need to say one more thing. To me, it feels like the vibe of when you know someone so well and they've been in a relationship for so long that they like don't need to have those deep conversations because they already have. And like if something comes up, they will have that conversation. But until then, they're kind of in like a I don't want to say steady state because like it's literally the opposite of that. Like it's like a
It's a cyclical state.
yeah, that's a good word for it. Like they're just sort of in this rut, I guess, but it's like a comfortable rut. They both know the other person well and understand where they're coming from. I don't know. It's interesting that we all have different takes, and I think they're all good. Like
Yeah,
I think
I
it's a
don't know.
crunchy relationship, but I can totally see Werb how you're bouncing off the actual words on the page because I do agree that it is difficult to get into with the plot not jiving with whatever you're getting from the characters.
Yeah, I don't know. And it's almost like there's just not a lot of plot. Like,
Just in general in this book so
yeah,
far.
I don't know. I think that they have potential. I'll see where the plot goes next. And there is one other part we have to talk about, which is the man himself, Iskoro Pust. Iskoro Pust having a staring contest with a monkey and then getting distracted after hours and losing, but coping by saying that this made him better and smarter than the mindless monkey. Hilarious. Other than that, I don't know. I'm not loving him.
He's just kind of like dollar store crop.
Yeah,
That
He's a
he's
better
way less
version of
annoying
Krupp.
Krupp. Yeah.
he's literally
You two
more
are-
He's a better
annoying. He's
version
like
of
Krupp
Krupp.
like has an actual personality. Iskoro Pust is kind of LOL random.
He's LOL random and
Iskro
he's got
Pus
spiders. Like Krupp
Iskro
annoys me
Pus is like the mentally ill version of Cottagecore.
What does that even
real.
mean?
I don't think this is no. You do this a lot, Lid. Cottage core is a specific thing. Like there are specific vibes here that are like no. Yes, he lives alone in the wilderness, but cottage core is not just that.
No, but it's about like fulfilling that emotional instinct to frolic in the woods.
He's well,
He lives
No,
in the
Pus
wilderness.
does.
You can't just include core at the end of everything, Lynn, to make it sound correct. I'm sorry.
Yeah. This
I
is the
am
wrong core.
correct core.
This is
I am the correct
Desert
core.
Temple Ruins core.
All right, because no one else cares about this.
Anyway.
Absolar and Crocus, the best characters in the series.
Yeah,
Can we return
they
to them,
are. They
please?
are, but we're not
Are.
getting enough. They're like we've barely gotten Absolar. I mean, we've had like multiple points where it's like, ooh, Crocus and Absolar are fighting, are they? And we don't see it. Like we get more Crocus talking about Absolar than we do actual Absolar, which I think is a little disappointing. And like, yes, we have that moment where she realizes, she was there when Surly decided to do a genocide. I'm glad they're here. I thought I would have to wait for Memories of Ice to get more, but I need more of that content. I need them pretending to be a married couple.
We do know that Absolar taught Crocus how to use knives.
Yeah,
That's kind of
I
cute.
really liked when they were fighting those people, like everyone contributed, all three got a kill in.
Crocus is kind of nice with it.
I really liked Absamar being semi-possessed by Cotillion still. That
She's
was
not
nice.
semi-possessed. She's not that.
She just has the remnant.
It has like remnants.
I like seeing the remnants of Cotillion and
Yeah.
Absalar.
Of course you do. You're like, my favorite part of Absolar is Cotillion.
That I'm not even. I never denied it. It's true.
It's wrong,
I was
though.
like,
Why do you
I
hate
was,
women,
like,
Lynn?
really
Why do you hate
into-
women?
I was really into Sori until she got unpossessed.
That
I was
was
like,
where
she's
she
the
got
coolest bitch
good.
ever.
Yeah.
Never mind, she sucks.
You hate women. We heard it here first.
There's the scene with the horse, right? In this reading, where they're going to the city. Is that here?
Yeah,
The marriage?
Yeah, when like the horse bites the guy.
yeah. It bites a guy's face off, and then like some of the horsemen want to buy the horse,
Because it's so
and
awesome.
and it's an honestly based horse. Like the horse. sometimes I gotta say, the relationship between a man and his horse can be really compelling because it's kind of enemies to lovers. He did not have the horse's respect, Fiddler, but over time, they kind of came together and they became allies.
I like the part where he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll just pretend to be a Grawl or whatever," but then like the actual Grawl like behind them, so he
Yeah.
has to like keep
And
going because they'll catch up to him.
and he has to
it'll
make
all
up
be-
this he has to make up this story that like he's a criminal on the run from his people, and he's like, damn, I really wish I didn't make up that story.
No, he just got so he was like method acting.
Yeah.
Like he was into it.
Yeah, I actually really like Fiddler. He's a funny guy. I feel like we did not really get anything from him in Gardens, where it's like, yeah, he fiddles and he's a bridge burner. Okay. And like personally did not care about the bridge burners in Gardens. And then in this one, it's like, oh, he actually has a personality.
Yeah, and he didn't become like a deeper character. He isn't like suddenly the most complex guy. He's basically the same character. It's just that his chapters starting to be written as like actual chapters where a person shows their personality through their narration, which he sure as hell didn't have. Whiskey Jack barely even had. But it's like this is honestly like one of the biggest prose glow ups in that like
You care about a bridge burner now.
like I don't know. Erickson was just not writing them this way, where it's like, again, it's not that he added things to the characters, it's that he's actually just written as a perspective character at all.
Him having a crush on Absolar was weird.
Yeah. I feel like also, like, how old is Absalar?
You're asking timeline questions
Isn't she
again.
like
She's like
17
16 or 17.
ish?
17. Yeah.
Also, I'm just gonna warn you now. I'm not telling you how old Fiddler is because no one knows.
Oh God.
How old is
Oh.
he? Doesn't come up as that.
I
old in
literally
like,
had to
in the
look this up
20s.
and read like a big forum post about it one time. While I
Yeah,
was
like
at
people have discussed it because
and like it's a hot topic.
so that
Wait, how old is he supposed to
don't
be?
ask the question.
Who knows?
Are you
Did
listening?
you literally
Ryan?
not? Okay, so you know how like you're not supposed to ask a man how much he makes or a woman how much she weighs. Don't ask Erickson about the timeline. The timeline is whatever it has to be for the story to make sense. And like it's not that bad, but like there are one or two instances where it's just not entirely consistent. And Fiddler's age is one of them, but whatever. It's
A
not
lot more
really relevant.
instances where it's not clear, which to me is frustrating, but
Okay, I'll be honest. I thought Quickben was in his 50s until you guys told me he wasn't.
Don't
So
ask how
That's
old
iconic.
Quickman is.
So yeah, I mean, is Fiddler being like kind of a creepy old man being attracted to a 17-year-old? Yeah, in the context of like a fantasy world and like the social norms that exist there, yeah, he would be attracted. And so it's like Fiddler is spending a lot of time around this woman, and the only other person he's spending a lot of time around is fucking Crocus. So
And Kalam is also there, but yeah. And Crocus and Abstar are both canonically attractive, but
hot? Crocus is hot?
yeah.
What?
Gee,
That's
what?
not right.
do you think Absalar
Are you
Absalar
insane?
do you think Absalar was just
Crocus is
immediately
minor
into him
coded.
because of his personality?
What?
I thought
Crocus
attracted
is
to his
Crocus
Prince
is
swag.
minor coded because he's really annoying. You can't call him hot.
Does that mean you're minor coded?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh shit.
Not annoying in the same way?
Okay. I'm gonna step in here because I love Crocus. I don't think that a character needs to be hot for me to like them. And I thought that Absalar saw Crocus and was like entranced by his like stupid swag. You know, like he was just dumb and she
No.
was like, wait, that's kind of cute. I thought he had like big ears and like was weird.
You know what goes hand in hand with stupid swag? Being a himbo.
Yeah.
No, I reject this
I-
categorically. Can I
I
look up
don't think Crocus is hot.
Duck,
Like
send me
I cannot
Crocus
imagine.
semi Crocus art?
I cannot imagine a hot version of
No,
Crocus.
me either. My brain is breaking. I don't like this. Let's move on.
Like I think Crocus looks like a 12-year-old Minecraft player. Like
Crocus
There
looks like
isn't
the Tug
really
like
good
he looks
Crocus
like a 12-year-old Minecraft YouTuber. Like that's just what he looks like.
There isn't really good Crocus fan art, I'm gonna be real.
Because he's ugly.
I do not know what parts of this conversation I'm going to cut out or not.
What? Why is he like a ninja boy?
He
He-
uses knives. What are
He
you talking
literally runs around on rooftops stealing after he sneaks into houses. What do you
Yeah,
mean by
Okay,
being a
okay,
ninja?
okay. Did y'all read Gardens of the Moon? Be honest. Like, if you
He
didn't
wasn't
and you just
sexy.
bullshitted, let me know.
Duck,
like,
you
he
know that
wasn't,
I
like,
read it
making,
because I
like-
complained daily.
That's true.
He wasn't making like, I don't know, like fox eyes at the viewer, like
Yeah.
while he was
Okay.
doing that. He was like being dumb and
You realize
stupid.
that a character's physical appearance, like, okay, for context here, Lynn became obsessed with Cotillion and insistent that he was the most attractive character from the word cotillion. Like, I feel like
There's a double standard being applied.
I feel like this is actually the same standard because Lynn does not actually conceive of the concept of physical attractiveness. And to be clear, like, yeah, beauty standards are arbitrary and all of that, but I feel like when Lynn says Crocus is not hot, I feel like she's not actually talking about how he looks, even if she doesn't realize that.
I mean, also Cotillion is hot. I'm gonna be honest.
I mean,
I
sure,
look
but
at
like,
that shit. Like, come on.
sure, but you know, that doesn't mean that the way Lynn works makes sense.
I agree.
Eve agrees with me.
But Eve
though.
doesn't
I
like
do, and-
men. So what are you gonna do?
Okay.
So I was watching someone's like first reactions to Gardens of the Moon, and she immediately started hard shipping Crocus and Chalice, like from the beginning. She was like talking about this like in her reactions, and I'm like, yeah, he's just hot. I don't know what to tell you. He's built different.
I mean, like, Crocus is definitely like a dumb idiot teenager. That's why we love him. But like, I think he's a good-looking dumb idiot teenager.
I think he's ugly. Like, I don't think he's like.
Yeah,
I just think
he's like
he's an
he looks like a
average,
twerp.
kind of silly looking guy. I think he's cute, but I don't think he's
Sure,
like a heartthrob,
sure.
like drop dead gorgeous model man.
Sure, cute, I can agree with.
Okay. All right.
Like, I think he looks kind of weedy and like a twerp, and like maybe if you squint, he looks like kind of cute, but like it's an acquired taste.
You're just into old men.
And that's okay.
We support you, Lynn. And we'll
Listen,
probably cut this.
Dancer isn't.
No, don't
old.
cut it. It's funny.
Okay.
I'm just-
Anyway,
spoilers for the rest of the series. Crocus is attractive. You can put that in the bank. That's long. It's fine.
True.
I'm never reading Malazan again.
But
anyway, Absalar like pretending to be a demanding wife was pretty funny.
So
And I
cute.
feel like
I
that's
that
like
scene.
I think that's like the only Absalar moment we have to talk about.
yeah, I wish it was more about them and we got sort of more of their relationship. I also feel like we're the only people in the history of the world to read Deadhouse Gates and demand more Crocus Absalar content. So
I mean, I appreciate the angle of how like they're still there, but we're seeing them from a different perspective. Like we're seeing them from Fiddler's perspective. I just want scenes of them being together from Fiddler's perspective because like we get a lot of Fiddler talking to Crocus, but we don't get like Fiddler watching Crocus and Absalar being a couple. Where if anything, like I feel like that's a thing that would be happening, like him getting annoyed at these stupid horny teenagers.
like his love suck kids, basically.
To be clear, I do not want to see more Crocus and Absalar. I only want to see Absalar if
you
she
don't
is
count.
in some form possessed.
Yeah, you don't count.
Yes,
Your opinion is
yeah.
not valid.
So you're literally the thing that Crocus called out Fiddler for, which to be fair, Fiddler was actually like, no, I didn't think of that. But Crocus was like, you just want the assassin back. You want the possessed Ultra Assassin back.
Because
And,
you're
like,
trying to assassinate.
Crocus was calling you out, Lynn, and you know what?
Yes.
It's true,
Crocus is
though.
right to hate you because you don't respect him either.
And you also think he's ugly for no reason. Like what?
I don't respect Crocus, and I'm ambivalent on like actual Absalar.
What do we think of the plan that Fiddler and Kalam have?
It's cool. I like the concept of it kind of coloring what we do in the series going forward. I'm not sure if this is something that will last like 3 books or last like the rest of the series or will get nipped in the bud here because things go wrong, but I definitely think it adds like an interesting structure to this.
I like the idea of Kalam trying to like push the rebellion along to like further weaken Lacine's position. Because like, man, that is That is a big swipe that you're taking. Like,
I really like Kalam's interactions with the other Seven Cities people because there's an element of like, oh, he's a traitor, but like at the same time he's like able to pass as one of them.
Yeah.
Like, and there's like a tension, I think, where like I think Kalam has more or less decided that he's loyal to the Empire, but I think he still holds like some amount of like not like dual loyalties, but like some amount of like affection and connection like to the
Yeah, I
whirlwind.
think like I think his thought process here is I hope once we get a better emperor in charge, they shut down this rebellion.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Which
like
I
his
like kind of how messy the loyalties are in general in his plotline. Like the guy, he's like he tells the guy like, "Screw you, I'm taking this book," and then the guy afterward is like, "Holy shit, we just got a guy to take the book so that we can, follow him and kill Shaik." Like I like the sort of the levels of betrayal going on there on like every level.
Yeah.
we also have the Red Blades, which are the police force that the Malazans have instituted in Seven Cities that I think is comprised only of Seven Cities
It's like Seven Cities
people.
people who are diehards for the Empire.
Yeah, which is ties into what the Empire would do in Guards of the Moon, which is that they would give the disenfranchised or whatever positions so they would be loyal to the Empire and not to their native homeland, which is a fairly understandable tactic.
In general, I think we don't get a lot of like the internal Seven Cities culture, but I do like just what we see of it when they think, for example, that Fiddler or Dwaykar is a member of that society and they're just like bantering with them. It gives a really nice idea of the way their tribal culture works and also of the like ties of kinship and like what your expectations are for like someone in that culture. So we're not just seeing them like from an outside perspective where they just like rape and kill indiscriminately.
There's also the scene with the Spirit Walker, which I don't know if you have
Oh
any
yeah,
thoughts on
that
where.
was I don't know if I have like a take on it, but I feel like it was just like interesting in its own right.
Yeah. I think the take that the Spirit Walker gives, because he was the person who like seeded the city, right? Because he knew what was coming.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a really interesting concept when you zoom out from like the Seven Cities like versus the Empire is itself kind of a false dichotomy because the Seven Cities is not like a unified political faction. They sort of, if they were unified, then it was like because of the Malazan invasion or like post Malazan invasion. So you get a little bit of that with on the Seven Cities side, but then also on the Malazan side, where that Spirit Walker like recognizes the Bridge Burners as being different from the other Malazan soldiers when the war was going on, and how he in some way he like kind of pays respects to them because they actually like respected the deal that he made. And then he shakes Fiddler's hand, which is kind of a funny scene where he's like, "Hey, don't touch me," like I know what you can do. At the end, he like grabs his
Yeah.
forearm or whatever.
And
So
Fiddler helping those girls was a good moment. I do think there's definitely like an undercurrent in this plot line of like girls being abused kind of for the sake of Fiddler or others kind of saving them, which I feel like is like, it's not like, oh, this book is, misogynist for like using that trope too much. It's like that's the kind of thing that's mainly a problem in aggregate. But I would like to see like different angles on, that kind of thing, which I guess is hopefully what Fellison will provide and is providing.
yeah,
I think I'm fine with the use of sexual assault in this book because I think that it is just realistically what you would see in any kind of revolt in the scenario, especially a revolt along racial lines, where
Yeah, I mean, there's that moment where like Fiddler like justifies it like killing those guys to the Seven Cities soldiers by saying like, yeah, like a Mesla slut would deserve it, but that girl wasn't one of them.
yeah,
yeah, like in a way the Malazan world is very egalitarian, but there is a sense there's still an idea kind of like as of like violating quote unquote someone else's woman being the best way to get back at them and to reassert your dominance and your masculinity. And I think that's kind of inherent to warfare in general. So I'm fine with the fact that
Yeah,
it
like
shows up here.
it's kind of the level where like I think there are definitely books that kind of overdo it on like, rape is realistic in history, but it's like I have no problem with fantasy that just says fuck it. no sexism, no anything. We're just gonna show like a society that's not that because you know what, like cool, it's fun to read those things, and I think it's good that we have those things to read as sort of a thing to strive for and escapism too. But I feel like Malazan lands in a respectable place where it's like it's showing that it doesn't have to be what it is in real life, but it's also acknowledging that like if humans in Malazan's world are like close enough to humans in real life, then like these things will happen. Like it's not going to sugarcoat it. It's not going to pretend that the dynamics of rape aren't a thing that occurs in those scenarios.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a very Malazan actually does get into it a bit more, like in later books, but it's a very primal part of warfare, I think. Where, for example, if you're like a Stone Age society raiding another Stone Age society, one of the things you're gonna do is just like rape or like abduct the woman. And it's just not necessarily an intrinsic part of warfare, but it's something you have to like put in the effort to take it out of
Yeah.
warfare. And that's
It's
obviously not
it's not
something they're doing.
inherent to humanity, but it is something where like it's not a cosmic accident that this became a thing in real life. There
Yeah,
are forces, there are
yeah.
aspects of the gender imbalance in strength that is, in aggregate the case, and there is just the fact that the majority of people have a sex drive that just like there are those forces that like lead to it occurring where like Malazan is a world that wants to be real enough about like facing the negative sides of ourselves and our societies that I think it's right for it to kind of show that this happens.
Mhm. Yeah.
What do we think about the? Do we get the a deck reading in this reading?
We get a fake one that Kalam witnesses,
Yeah, because when he shows up to like the
They
garrison,
throw the
right, and
cards at
he's
him.
and he's like that card
That's one
doesn't
of my
show up in
favorites.
7 cities, you fucking idiot, fake gamer girl.
yeah, well, he calls that girl's Jordan's fake. But there's also an element of like how fake can a reading really be, which I think is
Yeah.
really fun because there's some like, eh, there might be something that it really only makes sense in reread. I can't remember the particulars, but there's
I mean,
some things
there's
there
stuff
that should
that
maybe make you think that there's more going on.
stuff
You know?
lands around him, right?
Yeah,
Where like
there's
it's like the person reading didn't really like do it by her own power, but the cards
Mhm.
still kind of landed the way they did.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. And I think a lot of the deck that we've seen so far, at least, is about interpretation. The cards are sort of guided from what we've seen, but then it's up to the what is it called? The caster? The person who's doing the dealing to interpret it and figure out what it means. And I think that's this scene is really fun to me because I just love I'm not saying anything. Just cut this. There's a thought I have, but it's not coming out of my mouth, so we'll just move on.
Alzheimer's moment, but
Well, then
mood.
you also have the fact that he's getting followed by Lestariel, Eve's future favorite character of all time, and Pearl, I think is the other guy.
It's a slow burn.
Yes.
It's a strangers to lovers.
Or is it? No, it's someone else, right? I don't remember.
Yeah, it's not Pearl, I don't think.
Okay, ignore that. Um, no, but
Anyway,
she's fun.
something I think we forgot to mention, but I don't think there's much to say about is shapeshifters are converging. Why? I don't know. It has something to do with the Shadow Warren. Maybe Amanis has a plan. There was something about, a Tystandi Warren, but Tystandi were never on this continent. Wacky stuff.
And then also I don't know if we have a lot to talk about then. Something we probably should talk a little bit about is the concept of the whirlwind itself.
And I did want to, have a conversation about Shaik. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I do think it's a Malazan plotting moment that like we kind of get there so fast. Where like I think a more full narrative would just have like a longer journey for Kalam that would make kind of the subversions hit harder. Where instead it just feels like we got that so fast that we didn't really have time to like settle into expecting it to go one way. But it's still a cool twist that she dies and like, oh, well, she did open it. What's gonna happen? I think it's gonna be really fun to like read what happens in the rest of the story and wonder like, is this that being fulfilled? Is it just luck? Who knows?
Yep.
Yeah, I love the way Shaik is set up and then immediately killed. I think that it's really fun. And
She's also just homework being copied from the Black Company.
You don't have to say it.
It's true. It's a good thing to copy. It was cool in both.
Yeah, I know. I mean, if you're gonna take inspiration, like take inspiration from good shit. Am I right?
Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like I don't have like huge takes on it because I think those characters that were introduced seemed interesting. They might do things, but they just got introduced. I think, the like what Kalam wants out of it, the level of that.
I think the next part will clarify a lot more about where this book is going.
All right.
I don't think that's a spoiler, but yeah,
What
by like
else
the
is
next thing,
there?
we should be like, okay, this is where I think the plot
What else
point of
is
this
there to
plot is.
address? I think there's some more beats along like Fiddler and Kalam's plot lines that I don't think we've like dug super deep into, but I'm not sure we need to today. And this is honestly running way longer than we wanted, so I don't know. What else is there to say? Any big things we're leaving out?
Um,
Not that I can think of.
I'm trying to run through the characters in my head.
I have like a few takes I want to give on the themes, but they shouldn't take too long. Uh, this book is definitely themed around rebellion in a way that Gardens of the Moon was themed around invasion. There's definitely some history angles in terms of how we interpret history. I mean, we were talking last time about like judging Lysine as like a good or bad ruler, and that question was directly raised. I mean, I think Bolt was saying like, did Lysine kill her allies, or like is she just left alone without her allies? And like, would Kellanved have been? He was a good conqueror, but would he be a good ruler? And well, like, I don't think Lysine looks like a very good ruler, but that's kind of neat. Uh, I think there's an interesting parallel. I think we mentioned it between like the people of the Malazan Empire hate the nobles versus how the occupied hate the occupier in case of Seven Cities and Malazans. And all of that is neat, and I think there'll be more to it, but I don't think we can have like as long of a discussion about themes as we did last time, because just got to see where things go before I can like, try to really synthesize some deeper ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh, is that really all we have to say? Well, I say.
What do you mean? Is that really all we
Yeah,
have to say?
Yeah,
once
we
I,
were
I,
so-
No,
I
no,
heard
we can
it.
talk about Cotillion for another 2 hours.
Okay, let's top 5 sexiest Malazan characters. Let's go.
No,
Krupp,
no.
Krupp,
I'm kidding.
Krupp, Krupp, Crocus.
Lothario.
Real. But it doesn't kick in for 2 more books.
No, it's more like book 7 is when you'll really like her. Don't worry.
I started liking her in book 4. I remember because I was going on a run and I was like, wait,
Well, maybe
why is she good?
maybe you just don't know what liking people really is yet.
Yeah, you don't know what's
I say that about the person I know who's gone like the most feral over fictional characters.
Listen, if you just
you were
like
gonna
pick
bring up
any
Lostara, you a
if you pick
lesbian?
any female character and be like Eve, you're gonna go feral for her. Like there's like a positive chance that you
It's
get
a coin flip, yeah.
exactly.
Wait, is Lostara
Rapho.
you a lesbian?
Raffo.
99% chance.
All
she
right.
is.
Well, anyway, I guess that's it. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We were hoping it would be a shorter one. It's probably shorter than the last one, but I'm excited to read more of Deadhouse Gates soon. And not enough Krupp though.